In the past few years, Konami has been showing a lot of love for all the special summoning methods. It used to be that the new anime would come out and suddenly, fusion summon? What are we, cavemen? But as of late, new archetypes have been coming out which utilize these mechanics to their full potential. You like fusion summoning? Tearlamans and Branded got you covered. Are you more of a synchro player? You got Sword Soul and Punk. Xyz, Purely and Kashtira, Lynx, Tri-Brigade and Sprites. Heck, even ritual summoning has gotten some new support as of late. But there's something missing. Hold up. Yeah, where's the pendulum cards? I mean, don't get me wrong, since the end of the Arc 5 era, we have gotten new pendulum cards and archetypes, but it's not a lot in the grand scheme of things. We have only gotten 3 new pendulum archetypes in the past couple years, with Sulfachord, Valence, and Endymion, with only the last one being anywhere near competitive level. Meanwhile, the rest of the time, it's support for long already established pendulum archetypes, random one-offs, or pendulum cards for decks that have no real need for pendulums. Why does Amazonas have pendulums? With their weak sauce support and their treatment of some of their most important cards, I have to ask, does Konami hate pendulums? Are they dead? I know that there are plenty of people that hate pendulums, you either love them or hate them, but there's a lot to like about them too, but I'll save that for later. Let me first explain pendulums because I do want to clarify certain things, starting with explaining what pendulum monsters are. Pendulum monsters are distinguished by their green and orange coloring in the second text box. You can use them as a regular monster or as a continuous spell card in the left or rightmost spell and trap card zones, i.e. the pendulum zones, where they have alternate effects. Also, whenever they are destroyed, they go to the extra deck face up instead of going to the graveyard. With 2 pendulum cards set, you can perform a pendulum summon, summoning as many monsters from your hand as well as 1 pendulum monster from the extra deck to the extra monster zone, that have a level between the numbers listed in the topmost text box, referred to as scales. So for example, with the field I have out now, I can bring out monsters between levels 2 through 7 all at the same time. So that's the pendulum mechanic explained. A little complicated, but hey, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a pretty complicated game. You gotta do a whole lot of reading, which is too much for some people.
Why is this protected? What? She has another effect? Other aquas can be destroyed. What? What? Who tells you these things?
Pendulums were introduced in the Arc 5 era of the game, which lasted from 2014 to 2017. Throughout that era, there was no shortage of pendulum archetypes. Pendulum Magicians, Odd Eyes, Performapals, DDD, Cleafort, Abyss Actors, Zephyra, Draco Slayer, Metal Foes, Ignite, Amorphage, Supreme King. Now granted, not all of these are created equal, but they were a big deal and quite a few of them saw competitive play. However, that was only half of the Arc 5 era. Given that Arc 5 landed on the anime's 15th anniversary, Konami around that time also gave some love to old archetypes and the other summoning methods. So Fusion, Xyz, Synchro, and even Rituals all got their share of good archetypes during this era. A welcome change from the previous 2 eras where, unless you were using Synchros for the 5Ds era or Xyz for Zexal era, you were kinda bummed. So along with Pendulums, you saw plenty of great decks making the Great At events and regionals. But hold on. Tournaments aren't always the defining image for Yu-Gi-Oh! It doesn't matter if Jesse Cotton Candy Captain Crunch uses a deck, because the overall customer base itself has to like it. And that's where it gets tricky with Pendulums. See, even in their heyday, Pendulums were rather divisive, and I think that era of division has lingered to this day. So let's dive into a couple reasons why that is. First and foremost, the text. Yeah, I know this seems arbitrary, but it is important. Yu-Gi-Oh! Is already a wordy game, always has been. Ain't that right, Relinquished? And Pendulums adding a second text box just added to the complications. Let's face it, humans are simple creatures, and when your card has more text than a left-wing meme page's attempt at humor, chances are you're not going to be as interested. Number 2, the learning curve. Compared to combining monsters, adding up levels, or matching levels in previous summoning methods, Pendulums require a whole lot more practice and setup. I can imagine the explanation I gave still confused a good number of you. That's pretty hard on new players, which isn't exactly great for your brand spanking new mechanic that the era is themed around. I don't think it's any surprise that the next extra deck mechanic was basically, you got a monster? We ballin'. And finally, this is quite important, Pendulums were broken during the Arc 5 era. Initially, the Pendulum zones were 2 separate zones entirely, and you could summon as many Pendulum monsters from the extra deck as you wanted, which naturally led to all sorts of seemingly never-ending waves of monsters and extra deck powerhouses. This was especially bad during the infamous Pepe Tier 0 format, which was a whole debacle in and of itself. While Master Rule 4 nerfed Pendulum significantly, probably for the best, their reputation was already known. Since then, Konami has been very sparse with content for Pendulums, with only a few archetypes and minor support for use in otherwise non-Pendulum decks. You wouldn't actually Pendulum summon with a lot of these. If anyone has told you they Pendulum summoned with Predaplants or Speedroids, they are a liar! But as well, it kind of feels like they're apprehensive about giving Pendulums a real worthwhile archetype. It even feels like downright regret at times. It could be a number of reasons, like fear of another Pepe format, or maybe they're hard to design as they require 2 effects, or the more casual consumer's rejection of them. But whatever the reason, Konami has been half-hearted with Pendulum. As mentioned before, the only real Pendulum archetype with competitive meat was Endymion. And the best card that gave Pendulums a fighting chance, Heavy Metal Foes Electromite, was banned in TCG. I get that Electromite is powerful, but it wasn't like Hulk or Verte where you could put them in anything. Electromite was only good for Pen decks, which, as I mentioned, there weren't a lot of in competitive. And yeah, they're still giving support for established archetypes, like Draco Slayer got some good support that made them more playable, and Supreme King just got some new stuff announced. But they still feel like the red and green headed stepchild of all the summoning mechanics. To put things in perspective, the Albaz lore, you know, that Yu-Gi-Oh card lore that's surprisingly complex and far more interesting than any Warhammer 40k lore dump I've ever been given, utilized every single special summoning mechanic except for Pendulum. Wow. Maybe the Visa Starfrost lore line can make up for that, but I do think it goes to show you how much Konami seems to have given up. And I think that's really sad. Because the thing is, yes, Pendulums have a steep learning curve, but you're rewarded with a very unique experience and a lot of potential for crazy end boards. There's a lot that can be done with them, and I think there's a lot of potential for future cards. I always like when seemingly forgotten cards or mechanics get a second chance. Just recently, Volcanics were announced to be getting new support. An archetype that was frequently mocked as one of the worst ever is finally getting some major love to the point that people are talking about its competitive viability. Or in terms of mechanics, Fusion was thought to be well dead come the end of Zexal, but through archetype-specific cards and easing up on certain requirements, they came back in a major way. So maybe one day Pendulums can come back. I certainly hope so. But what about you guys? Do you think Pendulums have a chance? What do you think needs to be done? Let me know in the comments, please subscribe, and let's hope for the best.